Welcome, and on behalf of ASC's Scientific Integrity Committee, I'd like to thank you all for coming. By virtue of being here, you recognize that the topic of free open access of our science is an important topic. But I'd like to tell you why the Scientific Integrity Committee is behind this action. Our charge is to review matters related to scientific freedom and responsibility, and we lose both when some research is hidden behind a paywall while other scholarship is free and available for all to read. Furthermore, with the costs associated with publishing open access here in the United States, those scholars who secure grants or are at institutions that pay for open access or have research funds to pay for it are privileged above others. This perpetuates structural inequality and it biases scientific perspectives. We're here to talk about a way that everyone can make their work available through green open access. We will begin today with Eric Pisa, Professor of Criminal Justice and Director of Crime Analysis Initiatives at Northeastern University, who will talk about what green open access is and why we should all do it. Next, David Buell-Gill, Senior Lecturer in Quantitative Criminology at the University of Manchester, will talk specifically about CrimArchive and how it can help make your research more available. Now, we were to have Scott Jocks here, who was actually the person who built CrimArchive, and he was going to talk a lot more about the details of it, but unfortunately he's sick. So we're going to do our best to answer specific questions that Scott would be in the best position to answer. Finally, from the School of Criminology and Criminal Justice at the University of Nebraska at Omaha, we're going to hear from Professor Justin Nix, who's a distinguished associate professor who's going to share his own story that led him to publishing in open access. And then we'll also hear from his director, Galen Armstrong, who is the director of the school and distinguished professor of criminology and criminal justice, because she recognized the importance of open access in helping promote the work of those in her school. So open access is really a way for everyone to win. And so it's important that we educate everybody about what opportunities are available to them so that it will become more natural for all of us to do it. After the four groups speak briefly, I will take questions, and I'm going to ask you to use your hand raising feature on Zoom. I'm sure we all know how to do that by now. And I'll be calling on you to answer questions, to ask your questions in the order in which I see them. Now I'm going to turn it over to Eric.
All right, great. Thank you, Laura. So I actually prepared some slides, so I'm going to share my screen now. Let me move my Zoom controls out of the way. Okay. So again, first of all, let me repeat Laura's sentiment there that, we're very excited that so many people registered and attended today. We're very encouraged to see so many people taking time to learn what we think is a pretty critical issue for criminology and just the scientific disciplines altogether. So when people ask me or want to get a sense of why I'm so passionate, or when I read between the lines, annoying about this issue of green open access, I think back to a specific experience I had a few months ago. So I had the opportunity to present at the National Institute of Justice's revamped research conference in May. And I love the byline there, right? Evidence to action. And the way that NIJ organizes their panels really speaks to that goal, right? So the panels, at least the panel that I was a part of, included two academics presenting their research on a given topic. And then we had a practitioner at the end kind of explain their role in trying to implement evidence-based solutions in their jurisdiction. So the practitioner assigned to our panel was a leader of a community group who was tasked by the local mayor to recommend evidence-based solutions to violence prevention, right? And the mayor was willing to follow what the evidence said in setting their annual budget. So the leader of the community group shared this with everyone. And she said that when it came time for the community group to actually engage with the research, they hit tremendous roadblocks, right? As a community group, they didn't have subscription access to journals. When they identified studies that were on subjects that they were very interested in, they couldn't access them because of the subscription access. Despite what we like to think, and we all would like to say that if someone emailed us for our work, of course we'll share it. Most of the academics they emailed for copies of their studies never responded. So essentially, they weren't able to fully come through with the types of evidence-based recommendations that they envisioned. So let's just think about that for a second, right? A lot of academics, myself included, like to say that policy should be driven by evidence, right? That we do all of this scientific research and it should inform practice. Here we had a case study where the city government was behind that idea, the local community group was behind that idea. But when it came time to actually exchange knowledge, I hate to say it was the academics that dropped the ball, right? Our work wasn't readily available to the individuals that wanted to be informed by it. And if we're being honest, right, we're not just falling short when it comes to informing practice and informing the outside world. A critical look at what ASC expects us to do as academics shows that we're also falling short of the standards that we've set for ourselves. Everyone could read my screen. I won't go through of actually reading the quotes, but you can see here free open access to knowledge, free exchange of ideas, open science. All of these principles are embedded in ASC's code of ethics and also their purpose and mission statement. We're falling short of this if we rely solely on a subscription-based peer review model to communicate scientific evidence to the field. Now, the good news is we don't have to, right? The good news is we have the ability as individual academics and also as academic units to freely communicate our work. We could do that through open access. Before going into the specifics of open access, it's helpful to talk about the different models. When most people hear open access, they think of what's referred to as gold open access. Gold open access means that the version of record is freely available to everyone. Now, what is the version of record? The version of record is essentially the PDF formatted version of your article that the journal makes available, right? We all have the ability to do that, right? Unfortunately, that costs quite a bit of money. The price can differ from journal to journal and publisher to publisher, but essentially what we have found by looking at the ASC journals and some ACJS journals also, to be honest, that costs upwards of $3,000, right? Most individual academics can't afford that. Most academic units can't afford that. I would argue that even some academic units that can afford that, maybe that money would be better spent elsewhere. What we're advocating for today is not necessarily a move away from gold open access. If you have the funding to engage in that, we're generally supportive of that, but is to have more individuals embrace what's referred to as green open access. Green open access is the sharing of the pre-print or post-print version of your research articles. So essentially, the way I like to explain it is you have your Microsoft Word version, you submit it to the journal accepts it, you still maintain copyright permissions over freely and publicly sharing that version, right? So the preprint or postprint is that version of the article. Preprints refer to the version of the article before it is accepted by the journal. Postprint refers to the version of the article that is accepted by the journal. Those methods are 100% free. There's different guidelines and different permissions in terms of embargoes and exactly where you could post it. But the bottom line is every single publisher explicitly allows authors to share their pre or post prints in that manner. So I hate to be the bearer of bad news once again, but the lack of access to criminology work is not because the publishers are impeding us, right? It's because not enough individual criminologists are taking advantage of these permissions to publicly share their work. Now, I only have a few more slides. Just wanted to give some examples of exactly what do we mean by versions of records and postprints. So this is an example of a version of record, right? So essentially, this is an article that is published by the journal Criminology. And you see here, it has the Criminology format. It's been copy edited, it's been typesetted. The Wiley put the Criminology article on it. Put the Criminology logo to the top. So this is a formatted version of record. As individual authors, we cannot share this publicly without paying the gold open access fee. Here are examples of postprints, right? So to the left, that's an example of a postprint that is exactly what I mentioned before, right? So this is the Microsoft Word version of an accepted article. That article was accepted in Crime and Delinquency. This is not the fancy formatted version, right? But the content is identical. The substance of this article is exactly what the substance of the formatted published version is. As an author, I can do what I would like with that. I am legally allowed to make that publicly available. To the right side is another version of a postprint that I think is a little bit more aesthetically pleasing. So this is a postprint that was submitted to the open access repository Crim Archive, right? So it's formatted a little bit better. Again, it just looks a little nicer than the unformatted Word version. Again, I am legally allowed as an author to publicly share the postprint in that manner. All right, so I'm going to now turn it over to David, who's going to speak a little bit more about the Crim Archive repository that I alluded to.
Thanks a lot, Eric. I'm also going to share my screen and prepare some slides. Okay, so I think you should be able to see this PowerPoint. It's fine. Well, so first of all, thank you, Eric and Laura and the ISC for organizing this event. I think it's important that we start talking about open research and open access and open science more generally. And the fact that that it is the ISC organizing this event also says quite a lot about how seriously we are taking this. And so once again, thank you for organizing this. I'm gonna say quite some things about one of those open access platforms that we can use to share green open access documents for free at no cost for authors or for readers. But there are other platforms out there that people present in the room may want to explore. And so while we will be talking about Crim Archive and why we think it is a good tool for criminologists to share their research widely and more openly, it is not the only platform out there. So we are kind of selling this specific product, but there are other products that could be used for similar purposes. So just to mention a few that are out there, and SOC Archive is a platform, an archival system specialized in social sciences. Archive is I think it was the first archival tool for green open access documents in sciences in general. REPEC is the one specialized in economics, and there's also Law Archive for legal studies and so on and so forth. So while we're taking the lead with Crim Archive, there are other platforms out there that have similar initiatives. So what I'm trying to say here is that while this is a criminology focused webinar with criminologists attending the room, this movement is way wider than criminology, and it's happening across all the sciences at the moment. And the tool that we are going to present today is Crim Archive. Crim Archive was created in 2020 by my slides are freezing, by Professor Scott Jacks from Georgia State University. I think Scott could join, but he's not feeling very well. So I'm going to say a few things about what I think is the objective of Crim Archive and how it operates. But if you have any questions at any moment, please feel free to write them down in the chat, and hopefully Scott can help with that. So there are two main functionalities in Crim Archive, but we are working towards expanding them. Authors can use it to share preprints, and Eric already mentioned what preprints are. This is the version that we submit to the journal before it is peer reviewed, that can be shared by anyone at no cost. And it's quite intuitive, the platform at the moment, so anyone can just click on see and submit, then press preprints, and be able to share the document at no cost in an easy manner. Then you can format the document so it looks good and it's comprehensive for anyone to access the materials. I also wanted to say that at the moment, this specific platform is funded by the Office for Open Research of the University of Manchester, and we have an incoming director, Professor Nicholas Lord, from the University of Manchester as well. And before, Eric showed a couple of examples of how the published articles look like. There are different formatting options, but authors that submit, this is a preprint. You can see preprint and working papers here. And this is how it looks like in HTML format, but it can also be downloaded in a PDF format that then it can be shared widely with a student, for example, or elsewhere. We also thought it would be useful, aside from saying that this movement is not only, affecting or concerning criminologists, this is also a movement that is, it goes beyond American academia, even beyond British academia. And we have quite a lot of users in this specific platform at the moment. So since March 2021, over 307,000 downloads of articles from over 152,000 users. These numbers are quite large. I don't think many journals out there can reach those numbers. And I think this graph is even more important for what we're trying to illustrate here. So CrimArchive is used not only by researchers in the global north, but also from across many countries, basically every single country in the global south. So it's not only like using this type of services and making our research open. It's not only beneficial for us as researchers, because we have more exposure, more people read our work, and hopefully more people will cite our work, and it will have a wider impact. But also we are doing a wider benefit at a global scale. Basically, anyone from any part of the world can access academic literature, and therefore this can later be used for public policies, for crime prevention in our countries and elsewhere. We can see immediately that the US is the country with the largest number of users, followed by the UK, but we have many users all around the world accessing preprints and postprints published by CrimArchive. And that's all I wanted to say, or that's all I prepared for the slides today. I want to say thank you very much once again for organizing this workshop. And these are our 6 amazing moderators that are working basically every day to make sure that all submissions are moderated quickly and are in a nice format, so anyone from any part of the world can access these materials. And I'll be happy to answer any questions. And I think I'm handing over to Aileen.
Justin, thank you, David. Justin, you are next.
Thanks, Laura, and thanks, Eric, for asking me to come this morning and talk a little bit about my journey to open access science. I don't have any prepared slides, but I just thought I'd share a quick story about how I got here. As a graduate student, I was always taught the importance of sharing our work with practitioners and folks who aren't in academia, but it was always in the form of like publishing in a trade magazine or writing an op-ed in a journalistic outlet, right? We weren't at the point yet where we had CrimArchive or where that was anywhere close to normalized in our field. And so I took to using ResearchGate, which in hindsight wasn't really reaching anyone other than academics who already had access to most of the journals I was publishing in. And I got a little spooked actually one day when I logged into ResearchGate and a bunch of my articles had been taken down because I think there was some confusion over what was allowed to be shared and what wasn't on that platform. And so I deleted it, and I decided one day I wanted to try to build a website and share my research there. And so it took like a week of just banging my head against the wall every day to try to figure out how to code up a website, but finally figured it out and started sharing post prints and short summaries of my research when I published it in the same way that I'd seen Eric Pisa doing on his website. And almost immediately, I got some pretty great feedback. I'm in this group that the NIJ funds called the Lead Scholars Program. It's a group of research-minded police practitioners who either have PhDs or are pursuing higher degrees and are committed to evidence-informed practices. And a lot of those folks don't have access to the journals that we publish in, but they were seeing my work on my website and thank me for being a bit of an outlier in that I was sharing my work in that free way. And so, based on that feedback, I became more committed to doing it, and I started blogging about research that was maybe not quite through peer review yet, and just being more intentional about sharing my work at every opportunity. Around that time, Scott Jakes asked about being an ambassador for the Crim Archive. And it was at this point I started to think, it's great if we all as individuals commit to this, but what can we also do to try to make it more normal in our field, to normalize it so that others jump on board? And so I saw this as an opportunity to get my colleagues at UNO as well as graduate students on board with this and to start making open access just part of the normal publishing routine, right? We all were taught how to submit an article and do the revisions and, check the boxes when you get it accepted and so forth. Let's make sharing the postprint something that we just do as part of that routine. And so I talked to Gayleen, who was very supportive. And we realized, a couple of things that we needed to do was to clear up misconceptions about what it means. So, thanks to Eric for sharing, the difference between a postprint and a preprint and green and gold access, because again, a lot of us weren't trained on this, so we just don't know what we don't know. And so clearing up a lot of those misconceptions, like, hey, this is perfectly legal and this is your right to do this, goes a long way, I think. And then the second thing is to try to minimize quote unquote extra work. We finally get our paper accepted and we just want to be done and move on to the next thing. And anything beyond that might feel like extra work. And so at least in the short term, the routine at UNO was that folks would just email me a copy of that Word document once they got something accepted, and then I would get it up on Crim Archive. But Galen and I had some interesting conversations about how we could incentivize this, how we could, make it a form of service, maybe for junior faculty, and so on and so forth. She had a lot of wonderful ideas that she can share with us. And so that was my quick and easy journey. It was just like, it went from, selfishly, how do I share my own work because I want to do that, to how can we as a group get more people on board and make this the norm in our field, because it's already the norm in other fields. And quite frankly, criminology is lagging behind. So we got to catch up. So, Gayleen, what do you want to add?
Yeah, thanks, Justin. The part of when we started talking about this was to share a little bit from a chair's perspective or a director's perspective, and that's been my role here at University of Nebraska Omaha. And maybe we shouldn't always leave an administrator till last, but I promise I'll try and keep it short, no slides. But all the credit really for the work that UNO was kind of an early adopter of this, as Justin mentioned. It really lies with Justin Nix and him being out on front, and then also having just a dynamic research active faculty who are very interested in disseminating work. And for those of you, on this call that are in the academic environment, I think that I'm sure you can, point out to a handful of people right away in your program that are on that same page of trying to get their work out. But a couple of points that I want to share is a little bit of context if you're not familiar with the University of Nebraska at Omaha. The kind of research that we do in the Criminology Criminal Justice Department is very engaged. That's actually a message of our college and our program is we're a community engaged research program. And so, please, Eric, if you want to pull up the collection for UNO, that would be just fantastic. So Eric's story, when this webinar began, of his experience with trying to connect to agencies and sometimes the academics not always being as responsive. I get that. I've been in the field 25 years and there's always like one more thing we're expected to do with the same pay and the same hours in the day, right? But when we're trying to do our research, all of us are trying to make an impact, right? It's great to get highlighted and promoted in some way, but really, I often say and still laugh, like I went into this field years and years ago to try and change the world. And if our work is staying just within, as Jeff on here said, kind of commercialized journals or, within the academic walls and things like that, are we really having the impact that we want to? And we all are just living through what is ongoing in Maine right now, with some of the gun violence. I mean, how many of us wouldn't want to have our work somehow impact whatever the situation ends up being, on the East Coast, and our sympathies if you're from that area of the country at all. So, when we work with either police departments in this area or corrections or whatnot, we'll go out and we'll do briefings in small groups of faculty just to let them know the kind of work we're doing. We'll be very responsive to trying to share what's happening in the discipline with a particular issue that they're working on and things like that. And one of the reasons we have to do that is because these agencies or community groups don't have a lot of easy access to the information that even though we are trying to share and disseminate it in various ways, we're still kind of falling down. So, I'm so glad that ASC took this issue, that Scott did the background work and all those on this call to really get some of this going. But, there is still a persistent lack of access to some of the knowledge gained in academia. And it's not all being grown inside the academic walls either, right? Like with the LEADS program that Justin and also Jesse Huffett and many others are involved in as well. There is knowledge being generated elsewhere outside of academia, and we need to keep that partnership strong. But from a chair's perspective or a director's perspective, because I know there are several on the call as I look through the participant list, there are a lot of things to be thinking about. Many of us are writing tenure letters, and Laura brought this point up in our pre-meetings. When you're writing a tenure or promotion letter, one of the pieces that you typically, if you haven't received or read or written one of these tenure or promotion letters, one of the criteria that some schools are specifically asking a writer of a recommendation letter to speak to is the impact of work. Impact of work, we could argue all day long of how you measure impact, but some of the metrics that programs are using are citation counts, reads of work, things like that. Crim Archive, which I'm familiar with, admittedly, I guess I'm getting old. I'm not familiar with all the social archives and all these other science archives out there, so I'm so glad to be up to speed a little bit more on this now. We saw from a unit perspective or department perspective, this is an easy way to help our faculty and the work getting more, maybe citations, but certainly more exposures. We all are supposed to be doing a little bit of self-promotion, but certainly there's different levels of comfort with self-promotion. There are some who are really good at it, some who would love to do it, but just don't know how to self-promote their work. And maybe, some differences on personal characteristics of, gender differences or along cultural lines of whether or not a person should be promoting. But we know that comes into play down the road in academia, specifically when we're beholden to things like citation counts, things like how much does your work get read and cited, because that leads to other kinds of opportunities. And when we started the call, Laura opened with how there can be often disparate impacts when your work is not recognized or receiving the same level of focus that maybe it should. And there are also plenty of discussions about whether qualitative or quantitative work gets highlighted more often. What about scholars of color who might not have the same types of networks as they grow in different areas of the field? So what I saw from an administrative perspective is not only what a great benefit to our faculty and our program to provide easier access to everyone, about the great work being done at UNO, bridge that gap with community organizations, criminal justice organizations, but also maybe bring a little bit more equity to whose work gets cited. If you look at, I think this might have changed from when we first pulled the Crim Archive, but the other day when I pulled this up, actually within the first 5 articles, 2 of our brand new faculty members work. Well, there we go. Jen Toastley on the second article on your screen now, and Jess Steitzer, which is the 4th article on the screen. Those faculty are barely finding their offices. They've just hit the ground. And here's their work out on Crim Archive being highlighted, recent work as a brand new faculty in our department. How much better does that get than, boom, we're trying to promote you and highlight you and the good work that you're doing. So I don't see any downside to this at this point. The credit really goes to Justin, from an organizational standpoint. If you're a chair or director or even just a leader in your program, you don't have to have some, extra work and title to do this kind of thing. It's just to be an early adopter of this within your program. All it takes is mentioning this a few times to your faculty regularly. People are shy about self-promoting. They don't know what Crim Archive is. They don't know what pre or post prints are. It's legal. It helps. There's a reason we're doing the hard work we're doing. I think it's incumbent upon us to promote the work that we're doing and try and continue to help save the world. So one point I also wanted to add is, again, this isn't a Crim Archive commercial. There's other options out there. UNO has something called UNO Digital Commons. This might be something your university also has. Usually it's run and hosted by somebody in your library. So I'd encourage you to take a look at that. Our campus also has a really big push towards open access educational resources, essentially to try and reduce costs to students and have alternatives to textbooks. What a great resource if you can point students to things on Crim Archive or other kinds of open access opportunities. So I'm super proud of my faculty at UNO, super proud of Justin and his initiative. This would have never happened at our program without people like him putting in a little bit of extra sweat equity. It can be done, and I'm just really grateful that this is opening another, avenue and opportunity to get work out there. So from an administrative lens, I'd be happy to answer any questions that you might have about how to get your culture of your department around this. I don't know as much of the specifics, but I can tell you that it's been great for our junior faculty, our graduate students, great exposure, and really provided some additional opportunities for my faculty. So appreciate all the extra work that went in to get Crim Archive up and running by the founders.
Thank you, Gayleen. And thanks all of you for giving us such a good, clean perspective on what green open access is and how to do it. I'm going to open it up for questions. And we did have a question at least the first question that was in the chat. So I'll start with that. But if you have other questions that you want to ask in person, in case we're not as good at looking at the chat, use your hand raising feature so that I can call on you. Jeffrey Butts had posted green open access and these other archives still honor the 1980s model of corporate-backed journals established during the paper era. I realize universities coerce tenure-seeking academics to focus on those journals, but can't we overcome that? We don't need the old model journals to disseminate science, and peer-reviewed would be more efficient and even more effective if we organized it ourselves. I don't know if anyone wants to speak to that directly, but I want to put that out there. Okay.
Jeff, that's a fantastic point you make, right? I mean, academic publishing, if we're honest, is kind of a wicked problem, right? In the sense that there's a lot of different, perhaps antiquated models, right? We organized this to tackle one part of that problem, right? The issue is that in the current model, right, that academics are required to follow by their institutions, by and large, is very closed off from the public, right? So essentially, the little part of the big problem that we're trying to tackle is to fix that. I hear you on, do we need to be stuck to the old 1980s model? Is it fair for universities to hold faculty to that standard? That can't be tackled in a 30-minute webinar, right? So the part of the problem that we thought we could tackle is this part of green open access, because literally everyone here could go back to their office immediately when this is done and do their little part to solve that problem. Maybe we have a longer webinar in the future where we have that discussion, Jeff.
Thank you, Eric.
Laura,
Bob?
this is Scott.
Oh, yes, Scott.
Hey, sorry, everyone. So what I was going to say to Jeffrey's comment is I think a problem that I've seen in criminology and hindsight in academia writ large is we get focused on thinking there's like one right way to do stuff. And even though we can step back and be like, there's all these problems with it and make good arguments to do other things, we just don't do them. And I think Jeffrey, rightly so, feels like a lot of criminology is undervalued or loses its potential impact because of kind of arcane things in our publishing ecosystem. In like the 1950s, it made sense to have a review system like we have because there weren't computers and internet. That's definitely not as true anymore. I don't think conventional journals and that whole system is going away. At the same time, I think there's huge space to be made or that exists, and that can be successfully addressed by providing alternatives that are super high quality, and that when everyone looks, everyone goes, okay, this wasn't published in a quote unquote peer review journal, but I'm looking at peer reviews of, let's say, this report, and these peer reviews are published openly by experts and they're thorough. And I think, for instance, a process like that is a lot more scientific than secret reviews and secret editor decision letters, because it puts it out in the world and lets people have a dialogue about it. And so I would say, I know, and because to the extent Crim Archive looks like it let's say stands up the traditional criminology publishing model, it is, I think, a reflection of the extent to which that's just how criminology works. At the same time, that's not an excuse, it's a challenge. And so one of the things I've been trying to do for a long time, and a lot of us have been trying to do for a long time, and we're going to do it, is provide very good, if not better, alternatives to that, so that we get into a better place for everyone.
Thank you, Scott. Bob Lytle?
Yeah, thank you. This has been really informative. Really glad that I was able to make it to this today. One of the things that I've been a little confused on at times when I've thought about this is what the permissions look like. And I try to go through the copyright agreements when you publish and keep track of what's allowed and what's not allowed. The preprints I was aware of. I wasn't aware of the postprints. So the question that came up to me is, what can we not share typically with these copyrighted? Like, where is that line specifically? Is it just when it's a Word document as opposed to a typesetted article printed version?
Eric, would you, or Scott? I see you've unmuted yourself.
I'll go ahead. The short answer is, if you pay for gold open access, and there's also something called diamond open access, and that's where you don't pay article processing charge and APC. But if your version of record is open access, meaning it has a CC license, you can share that anywhere and everywhere. Anyone can. If your article does not have a CC license on it, that basically means you can't do anything with it legally, in terms of like that actual file, that actually pretty looking article that's in the journal, that is no longer yours. You can't. So I see a common thing is people share the proofs. No, those aren't yours. Those are the journals. You cannot share the proofs like that. What you can share, and the best way to address your worry is, I used to try to have people learn this. My position is you shouldn't have to learn it. Basically, no one on this call should have to learn it. Instead, you should rely on your librarians or people in your field who have gotten interested in it, and all of these types of people, because it's just not your expertise and there are a lot of nitty-gritty details. At the same time, there's good ways to always avoid the problem. So for instance, if you upload to your personal website or Crim Archive or whatever, every submission, so like you submit it to a journal, you also archive that preprint in Crim Archive, that's not something the publisher can come back like and do anything about, because it's explicitly in their guidelines that that's okay. And so in other words, the best way to deal with this is to not deal with it in terms of ask librarians, ask people for help, or just go to a blanket, I'm going to share everything when I think it's ready to be reviewed, which I think is a very good practice, again, just in terms of science of why let 3 people randomly review your paper versus make it possible for everyone to review it. I know the reasons to that, I understand those, but that's the kind of idea that's in play. And I know that wasn't exactly very helpful, and Eric's pointing this out, and so maybe I'll do that. Just don't let, I guess my point is, before I stop talking, don't let those kinds of things get in the way of sharing. And because people can do them for you, there's an odd thing in criminology. Either people don't share at all, basically, because they're afraid, which I totally get, or they do share and they don't understand what they can share, and they share the version of record, which is illegal. And that I have found, this isn't true in the study I did the other day, the little one I shared in the chat, but generally speaking, when I go through a department, I find more fully illegal uploads of their papers than I do legal green open access versions. And it's the authors doing that, right? And so we want to avoid that. And I think key to doing that is not depending on you to know all of these things and have people to support you.
And also too, just as a quick shortcut, Sherpa Romeo. So this is a website that nicely lays out the open access permissions for a given journal, right? So I just looked up the Journal of Research in Crime and Delinquency as an example. So if we look down, and to be fair, this isn't the most user-friendly format, right? But the published version or the version of record can't be shared unless you pay some money, right? So that's what the pound sign means there, right? So there's a fee associated with that. The published version, the accepted version, you see that this particular journal doesn't have any restrictions, right? So JRCD, and this is true of most SAGE journals, allows you to post that version a number of places. To Scott's point, the friendliest outlet is your homepage. The vast majority of publishers, maybe vast majority is overspeaking, but the majority of publishers seem to be pretty permissive with sharing content on your homepage. But you see here, there's a whole host of other places that you could post your pre or post print to. So this is a good resource if you're having if you're submitting a paper to a given journal and you want to get a sense of what the post publication copyrights permissions are. You could check out this website.
Thank you. That's super helpful.
And actually, thank you, Bob. And to reiterate Scott's point, librarians are wonderful people, right? I mean, librarians at every institution I've been at have been ridiculously helpful, right? So you're not bothering them if you email questions about any of this, right? They're anxious to help. Trust me.
Good point. Thank you both for answering that question. There is a question in the chat that is for the Q&A. Do the presenters have thoughts about SSRN, and is it overkill to post your article to multiple platforms? Who would like to take that?
I don't know what SSRN is, so I'll throw that out there. But just as a chair, I wish that my people would I don't care if you make a TikTok video with your findings. I think it's so important to put your work out there and, be proud of the work you've done. There's no shame in promoting good work and work of your colleagues. So I'll let someone else take the fancy acronyms. I'll stay over here in my old person corner.
Something I don't like about what you could call, like, let's leave aside criminology, but the open access world, a lot of like librarians and information scientists and the people like me that have just gotten really into it in a particular field, is they're like kind of anti-publishers and they're anti-for-profit and there are a lot of anti-things. And I think there's merit and I understand where they're coming from, but I also think it distracts from, and this is what I hear Galen saying, the most important thing is to put it out there somewhere, right? And like the idea of Crim Archive is to not just be a repository, but a hub, so that if you put it on SSRN, we will bring it into Crim Archive to boost its visibility and impact, not punish you, if you will, for not putting it on Crim Archive. That's my big thing. So whether you do it on a repository or SSRN or ResearchGate and all that, like if you want to get into nitty gritty details about what's best, we could do that. But what I think I learned from the past is when you get into those nitty gritty details, you really turn people off and you overwhelm them. And so that's what I want to avoid. It's more like if you have a place you want to share it, just share it there. You don't need to share it at multiple places. It depends on your goal. There's, again, an argument made that's not good. There's an argument to be made it is good. I would not overthink it. The most important thing is to put it out there somewhere.
And I can just add to that I think that most people that access academic literature published in open access repositories don't do it through the open access repository, but they find the DOI of the article in Google Scholar, and any of those repositories link, including Crim Archive, link publications to Google Scholar. And so for the purpose of dissemination, it doesn't really make much difference which platform you use to publish your articles, as long as it aligns with the general purpose of the website.
I'm gonna raise one point, and then I'm gonna read another question that showed up on the chat. What sort of turned me around or cleared up my misconception about green open access was that the actual archived version is not what gets cited in journals. They all get funneled back to the published version, and so that's what. So the journal that you publish in gets the benefit of you getting your work out there. So they like it, and you're not going to end up with, you know, a different citation for each of the archives, or a different set of citations for each of the archives. You'll just get citations for the one piece of work. What archiving your postprints do is draws attention to the work so that it can be used for, whether it's used as a reference for another article or whether it's being used by practitioners, it gets read and it gets more attention, that's the case where everyone wins. And so I also don't see a downside to it. Now, coming back to a question that was asked in the chat, what resources / opportunities are available to crim folks outside the US and UK to advance green open access in the use of Crim Archive? And it might have been answered already, but it'll be good to just say it out loud.
Yeah, I replied that one in comments. Just to reiterate that Crim Archive is open to any researcher based in any country of the world, and we accept submissions in, I think it's 5 different languages, but we're of course happy to expand that. So if someone publishes in French, I think French, Portuguese, Romanian, Spanish, or English, and we accept submissions in all those languages, basically because we have moderators that can moderate submissions. But we are happy to expand the number of languages back.
Thank you. I'm looking for more questions. So if you wrote
Laura,
a question, okay, go ahead.
So, and maybe Eric or Scott could help with this. And I know how I've come to deal with it, but I think it'd be good for the audience to hear, which is that some of our journals do have an embargo period on postprints. Wiley journals, for example, I'm thinking of Crim and CPP. And so there's like a 2-year waiting period before you can share your postprint in most places. And how would you guys suggest best handling that sort of barrier to sharing our work and when it's published in those journals? I've come to just post preprints, and then I put it on my website and put a note that it was posted as a preprint however long ago, and the published version will be available whenever it's available. But I'm just wondering if there's like a best practice in your mind about what to do with that, because I think there's a lot more hesitancy in our field with sharing preprints as opposed to postprints. Some people have their beliefs that you should wait until it passes peer review. I'm just interested in your thoughts.
Yeah, Justin, thank you for asking that. And it took us until minute 50 for me to make a spicy comment, but here comes the spice, I suppose. So I pulled up the JRCD information previously on Sherpa Romeo because I knew offhand that Sage, to my knowledge, has the friendliest green open access policy. Now, this is a little awkward to say now, given this is an official ASC webinar. The Wiley journals, which ASC contracted out their journals to, have by far the most restrictive green open access policies, by far. The home page stipulation that I was mentioning before, just in submitting the preprint right before you submit, technically gets around that. But I don't particularly appreciate the amount of tap dancing that's required to engage in green open access for the Wiley journals. So there's a couple of options there, right? One is kind of a longer term. I'm not even sure if it's feasible option. Maybe criminology and public policy just aren't Wiley journals in the future. All right. Maybe ASC just switches over to a publisher that's more supportive of this model. I'm not on the ASC board. I'm not, in any ASC elected position. So maybe it's more complicated than I'm letting on, but that seems to be something that we could at least discuss as a discipline. Another option, and this is getting a little into the weeds, right? And Scott, if you have any friendly, helpful or quick to get links about rights retention policies. If you could drop that in the chat. Another way around that, which some universities have done, this was pioneered, I believe, by Harvard, is to enter into a rights retention policy as a unit. So a rights retention policy, and Scott will correct me when I fumble the details here, is essentially an agreement that a university or an academic unit comes to that say that individual authors are now sharing their copyright permissions with the entire university. So, when you get an article accepted, you get the copyright form sent to you, right? So that copyright form is what stipulates permissions, and, that kind of puts into motion what can or cannot be shared. If your university now owns that, right, you aren't really binded by it because as an individual, you can't enter into that agreement. So what Harvard has done is they have that rights retention policy, so that allows them to share all of their authors' work, regardless where it's published, right? And to share it publicly. Now, this is a larger discussion of, when I've spoken to some people about this, the thought of signing over your copyright to your university scares some people. I don't think that's necessarily an unfounded fear, but that is one model, right? And Harvard University, I know for a fact, has been very successful in sharing all of their faculty's work through this model. Scott, do you have anything else to add?
Yes, and so this is where we start to get into trying not to overwhelm people, which was definitely my strategy early on. I would say to Eric's saying one about signing over your rights, the way Harvard did it, and if you don't know, Peter Suber is just like the number one guy, at least to me, in open access, and he's at Harvard, and the rights retention policy is him, and I forget the other gentleman's name, but he's just like a lawyer by training and a philosopher. He's just an amazing guy. And so he's very cognizant of these types of things. And the way they made the policy is you don't have to take advantage of it. Let's say you have a article and for whatever reason, you just don't want to share the post print. There's nothing in these rights retention policies that says you need to do that. You just don't do it. And so what these rights retention policies do is they give you an option to do something later that you may want to do. It doesn't force you to do anything. And that's a big thing about preempting the embargoes, is just thinking ahead of like, I want to provide myself with opportunities. It's the same with the preprints. Is I've looked very closely at the Wiley language. And if you submit every time you submit to Criminology, let's say, if you simultaneously share that as a preprint, you don't have to worry about their embargo. That's I can explain why in detail, but that's the short answer. And then it all kind of depends on, I don't want to say your risk tolerance, but just like different people have different, risk tolerances. And it's really about like, what are you trying to achieve and what are you trying to do? Peter Suber's thing, and the reason I mentioned the risk tolerance is, as a lawyer, and I'm sure we can understand this as criminologists, there's not a 0% risk of anything stupid happening, especially in America where you can sue anyone, right? But is there a practical risk of like any punishment, any like fine, anything serious in terms of the recommendations we're making? No. Is there any precedent? Not to our knowledge. And so it's really all about just finding out kind of what you want to do. And I've put some other links in, like there are some publishers like Sage, if you don't want to worry about it, publish in Sage journals, right? There are ways to do that. The personal website exception doesn't apply to Wiley journals. But again, if you submit the preprint or you have a rights retention policy, you're good to go. You don't need to worry about it. As a criminologist, though, again, I would say this is where I highly recommend you lean on librarians and the people on this call and stuff like that. Like, just ask, because we know we've looked a lot out of it. Like, you're not bothering any of these people. These people want to help you do these things.
Thank you so much. We are getting close to the end of our webinar. I want to make sure that I let people know that this is being recorded and we plan to disseminate it to the ASC list once we edit out our pre-webinar comments and banter. And I believe we can also make the chat available, or at least the links that are in the chat available, so that that people can access them as a resource, particularly those who were not on the original call itself, because I find that it's very useful. We have like 3 minutes left. Are there any closing comments or final questions that anyone would like to ask before we close? Okay, I see no hands up. I see one new message, and it's just more important information and links. So with that, out of respect for all of your time, I want to thank you for attending, and I want to thank those who talked more than me for presenting the information that you did, and also for doing a great job in answering questions. So thanks, everyone.
Thank you, everyone.